Now, Dr. Gerard Labuschagne is a forensic psychologist who spoke to convicted rapist and murderer Thabo Bester back when he was first in custody. Bester is due today in the Bloemfontein Magistrate's Court with his co-accused, and he faces a number of charges, including murder. You'll remember he was repatriated back to South Africa after faking his own death in prison and going on the run alongside Dr. Magudumana. He was subsequently arrested in Tanzania. But let's bring in Dr. Labuschagne, who joins us via our video link this morning. Doc, it's great to have you with us on the program. Thanks so much for coming on. So as I said in my intro, you spoke to my colleague Xoli Mgambi here on the channel not so long ago, and you mentioned to Xoli that you felt that in your interview with Thabo Bester, you felt that he was quite smart, quite an intelligent criminal. Given what's unfolded since then, I mean, just in the past week, is there anything that surprises you now on this Friday morning?
I mean, not really. I mean, obviously, as pointed out, I think that's just more evidence of how smart and well-resourced he was has come out, as we're going to learn more and more about how the actual escape took place and how many people had to be involved, etc. No, but I think, as I said, it's testimony to his level of intelligence, but also that relates to, therefore, his level of danger to society. I mean, you have someone who's a serial rapist and murderer, a fraudster prior to that, obviously the scams that he's alleged to have run from the prison, etc., etc. In a way, you could say he's gotten more sophisticated since he's gone to prison with all these types of scams. His initial scams were very kind of low-level types of things, and if you look at what he's alleged to be doing now, it's far more sophisticated.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the police minister revealing in that parliamentary inquiry over the past couple of days that in his arrest in Tanzania alongside Magudumana, he was quite uncooperative, Thabo Bester, but that Magudumana was very cooperative once they were apprehended in that country. What do we glean from that attitude from Thabo Bester, that uncooperative attitude that Thele described?
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't think we can necessarily attach too much weight to that. It could be his sort of self-centered personality, but at the same time, when I interviewed him in 2011, he was incredibly meek and mild. I think he's going to use whatever strategy at that point in time he thinks might get him the furthest. It could also be the strain and stress of being on the run, his whole world collapsing, that, you know, he was perhaps in a bad mood, literally. So I would attach more behavior to what we know he's done in the past repeatedly than to really how someone is going to behave at the point of arrest.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of discussion on this Friday morning around the case as a whole, but perhaps more particularly around the psyche of someone like Dr. Magudumana, right? There's a split between the people who say that very likely she is also a victim here, and then there are others who say she's as much a criminal mastermind as Thabo Bester is. Is it too simple to say that there are only these two options insofar as who she really is?
Yeah, look, I think everybody's speculating and just giving their own opinions, and that really doesn't mean much because, as you can hear, there's a wide range of opinions. So there'll have to be a proper assessment. I'm sure her lawyer's representing her, and we'll see whether they initially have the same lawyer representing them at this particular trial for the current crimes, or whether they're going to split and get their own lawyers and try and get the best deal possible. And I would imagine her lawyer is going to definitely sort of play on this aspect of him having manipulated her, etc., and having less culpability for her crimes or responsibility. You know, we often have seen when there's romantic partners involved in crimes that there's very often a level of manipulation, but that's not necessarily enough to excuse the person from their own actions. I mean, we saw that with the Advocate Barbie case many years ago, with the Prince Advocate Barbie, the sexual crimes they got involved in, you know, but of course she was also a qualified advocate and an adult. So we'll really have to look at I wouldn't surprise me if there's a level of manipulation. I mean, that's what Thabo Bester does. He manipulates people to his own advantage. And if people serve no purpose anymore, then they're kind of shifted out of his life. So I don't doubt that there probably was some manipulation, but whether that's going to be enough to excuse her from her actions is going to be up to the court to decide. And I doubt really she's going to be able to walk away scot-free from this, claiming manipulation. So at best, it might be something that's mitigating, you know, at sentencing. It might be taken into account in that regard. If she pleads guilty, that of course maybe might count into her favor in terms of a sentence, etc. But her walking away scot-free from this, I really don't see that being possible.
Yeah. I mean, you've obviously got a lot of experience in the field, Dr. Labuschagne. You mentioned Advocate Barbie, who was an advocate as well. Nandipa Magudumana, a celebrated aesthetics doctor, smart, obviously accomplished, very well connected as well. People were so surprised when the details of this issue first emerged. So how do you go from that to this?
Again, it's difficult to say. People will have to really try and get a better idea of what was actually done, the nature of the relationship, when did it start? I mean, did they know each other prior or to his incarceration in 2011? Or is this something that somehow blossomed afterwards? And I've often seen in the cases I've worked on where, for example, you'd have a guy who's charged with brutally murdering his girlfriend. He's out on bail. He starts a new relationship with a woman who finds out exactly what he's on trial for, and she continues to stay in a relationship with him. So this is something that we often see in people who are incarcerated who then find love with someone on the outside. I think, like I said, if there was a prior history, it might be easier for him to kind of leverage her. But if this was really that they met after his incarceration, it would be quite fascinating to hear from her. How and why did she ever consider that this was a good idea getting into this relationship, let alone the manipulation processes that might have taken place to keep her in it and suck her into that relationship further afterwards?
Well, the information that we have, just some of the timeline information that we have of their relationship, is that they first met in sort of around 2011. And then in the years after that, he was incarcerated, she got married, she had children. And they sort of reconnected around 2017. Again, this is speculation because you've not sat down with Dr. Magudumana either. So we're speculating here. But there are certain things we can draw, right, from your experience in the field. How does that happen? How does that happen? Where you have a relationship, you now, in 2017, you know things about this person that you did not know at the start of your relationship in 2011. Shocking things, rape and murder involved. How does that happen?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, of course, he was arrested in October of 2011 for the 2 rapes and the murder, and then it took place in Milnerton in Cape Town. So, that if she had met him in early 2011, by October, it's out and about and known to everybody that, he's pled guilty. So, I mean, it's one thing if you are found guilty through evidence, but you deny your culpability and you convince the other person that you were falsely convicted. But if you yourself pled guilty, it means you're acknowledging what you've done. So again, it's difficult to decide. One also perhaps has to look at her own background, her own vulnerabilities, psychologically, etc., her own history of relationships, which would feed into perhaps how she believed or was influenced by Thabo Bester.
Yeah. Dr. Labuschagne, as we end off our interview this morning, what do you reckon would be going through Thabo Bester's mind now, having been apprehended in Tanzania? It was an escape plot. He was trying to flee the country. There was a plan in place for him to be a free man, which has now been scuppered, right? He's back at Hosi Mampuru, C-Max prison. What would be going through his mind?
Look, I think he's feeling absolutely as if the carpet's been pulled out from underneath him. If they had passports, it means clearly that they've been planning at some point to flee. Their elaborate schemes in such a whole high-profile way, they would have known were going to collapse at some point. So they probably knew at some point they're going to leave the country. That couldn't come out and him stay in the country because he's already a fugitive from justice. Once it was uncovered, he'd fled. So they probably knew that was going to happen and prepared for it. And I think in my previous interviews, I'd said prior to them being caught that I doubt that they're in the country. So I think all that planning and preparation has now just really fallen flat. So he's probably feeling just as dejected as anyone could possibly be at any point in their life, because obviously his cash cow and his biggest current supporter, Dr. Magudumana, is of course now also going to be probably put in jail and definitely is in custody at this point in time. So, he really has to start from scratch. The authorities are going to be all over him even more so because of this kind of behavior. So I guess he's finally hopefully realizing he is going to spend the rest of his life in jail because, of course, he'll face convictions for the new charges. And if they can get a murder charge to stick with his current escape, if they can prove that he was implicit in that particular murder of this individual, and it wasn't a body that it came from a forensic mortuary, for example, he's going to be facing another life sentence because that's a premeditated murder that he would have been involved in orchestrating, and which of course means another 25 years from now, or whenever he's convicted, before he could be considered for parole. So I think he's really facing perhaps the reality for the first time of what his future is going to look like.
Dr. Gerard Labuschagne, let me thank you for your time. Thanks so much for giving us some insight into the minds of Thabo Bester and Nandipa Magudumana. Labuschagne is an investigative forensic psychologist. So many legs to the story. We've got it all covered for you here on 405.